And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, proud sponsor of the African Mining Indaba 2025. Good evening. Welcome to The Money Show. I'm Stephen Grootes. Well, of course, the headline stories you heard in the EWN bulletin is around land reform, the president signing the Expropriation Act into law. There are a few sort of off the top of my head comments that I think you can make immediately. The one is there will be a huge amount of political noise about this. And if you consider the fact that expropriation generally would be used to deal with our history, with the fact land was taken from one group of people by another group of people with violence, well, then you can understand why there'll be so much emotion about it. So trying to cut through the noise really becomes one of the difficult parts. Well, we'll try and do that this evening. The other point I just want to make about this and one or two other bills, and this is not a comment about the Expropriation Act per se, it's not a comment about any of the other acts, but it seems to me that it might well be problematic for the president to sign a bill into law when it was passed by the previous parliament and not the current parliament. I'm sure the argument would go, we can't just stop the process, we need to continue, it was passed, everything is legal. Fine. I don't know if it is moral to sign something into law that was passed by a parliament elected in 2019 when you've had an election since then, if you see what I mean. To put it another way, do you think the Expropriation Act would become law if it went through the current parliament that was elected in 2024? I mean, that would be one of the tests. Now, I imagine there can be all sorts of arguments about this. I'm sure someone will come with some sort of technical discussion. I just think it's kind of standing on the border or on the line of, undemocratic practice to do that. I think that really is, for me, the difficulty. I think that's really what you've got to be a little bit nervous about. I think that for me is really one of the issues here. It also means that, you don't really know exactly what you're dealing with. You would think that if you're an investor and you're making decisions based on the outcome of an election, well, then you kind of know. But instead, you're making decisions based on the outcome of the 2019 election. As I say, there might well be some kind of defense for this, but I do think it just leads to problems. I was fascinated today by something that's been happening in Europe that has had an impact on Supergroup. They're, of course, a big South African company, and they, of course, had an update out today suggesting, in fact, that their sales will be down quite significantly. And not mainly because of their South African operations, but because of what's been happening in Europe and the UK. And it turns out that Ford sales are down dramatically. I went to go and sort of see why. And one of the reasons is that Ford has been cutting models in the UK. They want to sort of focus on the off-road market, which is probably why you see so many Ford Buckies on certain roads at certain times. But it does still strike me as interesting that a decision by Ford could actually lead to huge problems for Supergroup. And of course, we will be keeping an eye on the US President Donald Trump. Good to hear from you tonight. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567 and 072 702 1702.
The Money Show
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, a statement from the presidency this afternoon confirming President Cyril Ramaphosa has signed what is now the Expropriation Act into law. It provides for the expropriation of land under certain circumstances. No compensation would be paid. You know of the political power of the issue of expropriation without compensation, but as I understand it, nil compensation or no compensation would only be paid under very specific circumstances. I wouldn't be surprised if there is more court action on this at some point. This afternoon, I was able to speak very briefly to the Minister for Land Reform and Rural Development, Mzwanele Ntyonso. He did say he'll try and be available for you this evening, but he was traveling, and he said that might make it impossible. Not answering at the moment. We will keep trying him because we do want to hear his view. I suspect that he may have a very informed view about what is to come next. Bulelwa Mabasa is the head of land reform at Werksmans, also a member of the President's Land Reform Advisory Panel, on the line to you now. Bulelwa, good evening and thank you for your time. Expropriation and this argument has been intensely political, can be very personal for many people as well. That does mean there's a lot of noise around it. What powers does this act give government it did not have before?
Thank you for having me, Stephen. The concept of expropriation as a legal concept, Stephen, has been with us since time immemorial. And in fact, South African law borrows the concept from European powers such as the Netherlands and Germany and so forth. To put it quite simply, expropriation is a power that is given to a government to expropriate or take land away from people when the government needs it for a public purpose, such as building of a clinic or a road or a hospital, or in the case of South Africa, when it is in the public interest. And in South Africa, the public interest includes specifically in our constitution the nation's commitment to land reform. So really, this is a state power that is used when land is required for the public interest or in the public for a public purpose.
Okay.
So the power. So to answer your question more specifically, the power to expropriate has always existed, and as I said in your introduction, this act is a sequel to an act that we've had for the last 50 years, which was the Expropriation Act of 1975. So the state has always had the ability to expropriate, and expropriation has happened before, even prior to the finalization of our current constitution.
I mean, there's a classic case. Some land was expropriated to build, say, the Gautrain in Joburg, for example, right? If it were to be expanded again, if you look at where it would go, more land would have to be expropriated. Where this gets very difficult is when people talk, I think, about land restitution and farmland and land reform. Now, that would be slightly different. That's not for the public purpose of development or a clinic. It's for another purpose, which is constitutional, as I understand it. But does the act now, the new act, give government a new power, or does it give government a power to take land and give no compensation, which government did not have before?
That's an interesting question. If we look at what the 1975 Act did, it didn't kind of have the administrative justice mechanisms and safety provisions that ensure that the process is a negotiated process. What this act does now, it introduces elements of the Promotion of Access of Administrative Justice Act, which means that the state power isn't absolute. In other words, the state has to give an owner a notice of expropriation. The owner has a right to agree or not agree to the expropriation. Additionally, what we didn't have before is that the compensation that is payable, it's the owner that must first offer an amount if the owner is amenable, an amount that it wants for compensation and so forth. So what we see in this legislation is a kind of a symbiotic, negotiated expropriation, including the amount of compensation. The narrow instances where nil compensation is paid or no compensation is paid includes, for example, land that is not being used, where the owner sits on land on purpose to increase its value. Before this amendment, there were different wordings and iterations that were used. So I suppose this wording now steers clear away from wording such as speculative purposes. There's going to be nil compensation where the state holds land that it is not using for its core business. We know that there are many state entities and even state departments that hold land when it is not in their core function to do so now or in the future. Those pieces of land, would be subject to nil compensation. And of course, we find a lot of this, especially in the inner city buildings, where the land has been abandoned for many years, where the owner is not traceable, or where the land, the owner has not exercised care over the land. So what we have here, Stephen, are very specific circumstances on which nil compensation is payable. And in fact, the bulk of the legislation actually makes provision for just and equitable compensation. So if we're to look at the bill in its entirety, we find that compensation is still at the core of our expropriation concept. The only difference is that they introduce those certain instances, where nil compensation is not going to be paid.
Could I put this another way, and I'm afraid I won't use legal language. Any land that is productive or has people living on it is unlikely to be expropriated for nil compensation.
The general answer to that would be yes. The test is the following, Stephen. Is the land, was the land, what is the purpose of the expropriation? Is the land being used? What is the current market value of the land? Was the land, were the investments and that sort of thing paid onto the land? So those factors are what would ordinarily not make land subject to expropriation.
Okay. As you know, this is intensely political. There will be people who claim this shows land rights or property rights in South Africa are under threat. To me, as I speak to you right now, that would seem like just hyperbole.
100%. I would agree with you. And I think this this act actually clarifies a lot of what has been seen in the public domain, which has largely been conjecture.
I really do appreciate that. Thank you very much indeed. Bulelwa Mabasa, getting through the noise there, Werksmans head of land reform, member also of the President's Land Reform Advisory Panel. We will keep trying the minister. He did warn me that he might be in a place where, unfortunately, he would not have reception. We will keep trying to speak to the Minister of Land Reform and Rural Development on The Money Show. 20 minutes after 6.
702. Stephen is on X.
At Stephen Grootes.
Well, I don't know the price of your happiness, but I do know the price of mine. Stats SA yesterday confirming coffee inflation is still incredibly high. And in fact, coffee inflation is still at 16% year on year. And if that doesn't make you miserable, then I'm sure that this will. Cocoa beans, the primary ingredient of chocolate, have jumped by 90% in the last few months. How happy do you feel right now? Anthony Gerd is the co-founder and director at Honest Chocolate. Anthony, what on earth is going on?
I wish I could answer your question fully, but we actually are a little bit in the dark too. There's been terrible crops in West Africa, which produces most of the cocoa, and that just seems to carry on. It's a terrible situation.
The thing about chocolate, if I understand it correctly, the history of it is that it was first used by people in South America. And it seems that this is one of those crops that's not very easy to diversify. Just problems in one part of the world have completely affected prices everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. I think the problem is it depends what you read, but 60% of the world's cocoa is grown in Ivory Coast and Ghana. So it's highly concentrated in those areas. And that's the area that's had a lot of problem with weather in the last 3 years and basically crop failure. So whereas the rest of the world hasn't had that, the supply, if it affects that area, which grows 60%, that's going to affect prices everywhere. We get directly from Tanzania, which hasn't been affected by crop failure. But, of course, people are willing to pay a much higher rate because you can't get it in West Africa. So, the price just goes up.
And I presume it goes up pretty much, it's a bit like other food, like the maize price, for example. If it's higher for us, it's higher for people in North America too. I presume this is happening around the world. Wherever you are, you're paying more for chocolate right now.
Yeah, exactly. It's a commodity, as you know, traded on the stock exchange. So a lot of, for example, our price is linked to the London Stock Exchange price. We already paid more than about double because of our ethical source and organic beans. We make sure it goes back to the farmers. But now, even that has been surpassed by the market price. So we pay above the market price, but the market price is double what we used to pay in the first place. So we actually spoke to our suppliers this morning, and we're probably going to end up paying, from our last shipment last year, we're going to be paying 140% more for the same beans.
Sure.
In 1 year, yeah.
Do you find that different grades of chocolate or different types of chocolate? I know very little about chocolate. I live with an expert on the consumption side, and that's it. Do you find that, for example, is there a price difference between dark chocolate and milk chocolate? Do they come from the same bean? I don't know. I presume they do. Do you find that there's a difference between sort of premium, the increase for premium brands and actually non-premium brands maybe not quite as big an increase?
Yeah, so if you talk about the finished product, the actual chocolate slab, the cheaper chocolate has a very low percentage of actual cocoa bean in it. So if you think about a very cheap milk chocolate, it probably has about 20% of that is actually cocoa bean. But if you think about a 70% slab, that means that 70% of that dark chocolate is the bean, and that's going to be really affected. So the cheap chocolates are not going to be as affected, but your 70% cocoa percentage and higher is going to be very much affected.
I would think that if you consider the chocolate market around the world, that people in other places would try and grow it. And clearly, maybe some are, maybe it's just not very successful. But I would think also with climate change and everything like that, we're likely to see more people trying to grow more crops in more places. I mean, any idea on whether that's going to happen with chocolate?
It is, in fact, happening. You're spot on. So we're speaking to some guys, South African people who, part of the family lives in Malawi in the north, and they are looking at planting. I think they're already planting it now, and more in Uganda as well. And I know that more in Tanzania has been planted because of this price increase. Historically, the small-scale farmers haven't, got a lot of money for the beans, and that's been a terrible thing. Part of what we try to do at Honest Chocolate is pay a higher price to change that, so that the farmers actually are incentivized to stay in farming cocoa. So now that the price is so high, in a lot of places, farmers are incentivized to actually now grow more. The problem comes in Ghana and some other countries, Ivory Coast, there's a cocoa board which sets a price. So some of those farmers there aren't actually reaping the benefits of this extreme price hike because the prices are kind of fixed there. But for example, in Tanzania, the guys we get from the Cocoa Committee, the farmers are really reaping the benefits, which is amazing. It's really amazing.
Anthony Gerd, thank you very much indeed. The economics of chocolate on The Money Show. Anthony's co-founder and director at Honest Chocolate.
The Money Show.
The markets.
Graham Corner is at the Corner Perspective. Graham, good evening to you. Sasol, an update from them. They'll be producing less synthetic fuel. Problems with stone in the coal. I've used that joke already today. All in all, bad for their share price.
Yeah, good evening, Stephen. It's absolutely right. I mean, Sasol, initially, I think after it, holding up reasonably well, but down almost 5% on the day. And unfortunately, wherever you looked, it was pretty bleak. So, the East Cracker in the US, Maputo, fire at Natref, you name it. It was like the perfect storm against them. So just when you sort of got the feeling, well, maybe the share's actually starting to show some signs of life, the oil price was recovering, then this trading update comes and just takes the rug out from under them.
There was some commentary at the beginning of the year that the only way for Sasol's share price now was up. There was a jump at one point after their CEOs about 2 weeks ago suggested they might sort of list their chemicals division separately. Then this news comes. Sasol still has trouble.
Yeah, I think it goes to the core of the business. What you were just chatting to, your previous guest about, climate change. Of course, that's the sword of Damocles hanging over them because, Sasol is a massive CO2 emitter and polluter. And, eventually that'll come home to haunt them. So I think the reality of it is Sasol is operating in a different world. Its business model is the same as it was 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. Maybe not 20 years ago, but the world has changed and is changing quite rapidly. So, whether the outlook is only up, I'm not sure. It really seems to be disappointing. And unfortunately, it's a kind of business model that can't just, reposition itself. They're trying hard to move more towards green and environmentally friendly energy and migrate. But it's, the core of the business in terms of spin fuels, for example, is just such a massive contributor. It's going to take a gargantuan effort for them to diversify that.
The other big thing that's changing at the moment is the cars that we drive, sort of. And Supergroup seems to have been caught in the middle of that a little bit. They also are saying their sales will be down quite significantly. Mainly, it seems, because their British outlets are not selling as many Fords. And in fact, I went to go and look it up. Ford sales in Europe and Britain have dropped dramatically.
Very much so, Stephen. If you look, I didn't see the December numbers, but sort of late last year, in many parts of Europe and in the world, you're seeing EV penetration at 30% or thereabouts. And I think one of the things that hurt Supergroup here was the fact that in the UK, they've obviously got emission monitoring standards, and that's really not good for what they call ICE engines, internal combustion engines. And that's really, I think, what's hurting Ford. But the reality of it is, Supergroup, like Sasol, was probably hurt, or not probably, was hurt by, the Mozambican situation, but also very much a climate change thing again. Demand of demand for coal and the supply of coal also hurting them. So, unfortunately, they were more hit, I would argue, than Sasol. I think they were guiding earnings down to be about 30%. Having said all of that negativity, they are still on track probably to sell SG Fleet, which is a fairly significant portion of the current NAV. So, it's not all doom and gloom for Supergroup shareholders.
And then very quickly, in China, the 6 financial regulators that operate in the Chinese markets explaining today that state-owned insurance companies are going to be pouring billions of yuan into stock markets there. Obviously, another attempt at stimulus, and the timing is fascinating.
Yeah, it's not coincidental. It follows, a couple of days after Trump's inauguration, although he seems to have softened the position slightly on the tariffs. But, that's coming, and I think China needs to reposition itself. I think in many ways, they clamped down on the private sector, on the tech companies and, education and so forth. And I suppose in a way, they're paying a price for that. But that was, one would argue, for political for a different political order. So my sense of it, Stephen, is that, China is a massive machine. It's going through a very difficult phase now, whether it be the property market or shadow banking, but they will emerge. You can't keep over 1 billion people down, highly educated, highly motivated. So I think it's, these are just short-term challenges. My sense is China will overcome its problems, be they self-inflicted or through tariffs from Trump. It's an amazing country. So I would, we see value, for example, in Chinese equities, but we recognize that it's going to be a bumpy ride.
Thank you very much indeed, Graham Corner at the Corner Perspective. Really appreciate it. Just after 6:30.
WhatsApp Stephen
on 072
702
1702.
Well, you might have heard at the start of the program tonight, I made the point that I think it is bordering on undemocratic practice to sign into law acts that were passed by the previous parliament. And my point really was that you are then signing something into law that is the will of voters from 2019 rather than from 2024. Very intriguing, and I think quite a strong response to that tonight.
Good evening, Stephen. This is David in Swane. Regarding the Expropriation Act, on the Bella Act and any other leftover legislation from the last Parliament, of course it would be tidier if they'd been passed, signed by the President into law and taken effect before the last elections. But the point is they were signed by a Parliament which was elected. If the newly elected Parliament a majority doesn't like them, they can amend them, they can repeal them. That's the democratic process.
Well, that's David's view. Your view. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. Do you think this is really going to change anything? That's the other question. The ANC's put out a statement tonight saying they believe this is a very progressive step. It will lead to land restitution. Do you believe that? Very intrigued to hear your view this evening.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app
and DSTV channel 856.
Intrigued to hear your views on the land expropriation question. I made the point, and I'll probably have to make it again before this is well and truly done. There'll be a lot of political noise one way or another. So to try and work out what exactly it means, very indebted to Bulelwa Mabasa to just explain it with such clarity. Essentially, productive land or land that people are living on is incredibly unlikely to be expropriated without compensation. Otherwise, pretty much the same procedures still sort of play out. The rule of law still very much part of this, as you can see, as you heard. But anyway, still very interested in your view about that. I do think it is very, very important. We'll be talking a little bit about cybersecurity in a moment, and something that, with all of the fuss and bother around the new US President Donald Trump, everyone's been talking about social media, talking about the sort of tech titans, all of that. But there's a big focus on cybersecurity there as well. And then from 7:30 in investment school, something I haven't done on investment school actually, is investing and your children, not investing for them. I'm presuming you do that anyway if you listen to The Money Show, but actually about teaching them how to invest. I suppose it's the value of one ice cream now or two ice creams tomorrow, if I can put it a bit like that. Might be one way of looking at it. But certainly one, you get a sense that if you teach children young, if you get the idea of deferred gratification, delayed gratification, in other words, if you're able to sort of hold on for more gratification later, which is really the secret to so much in life, well then maybe that's what you want to be listening to from 7:30. Well, in the White House, the US President Donald Trump firmly there. It would seem he's also firmly in charge of US policy, and this may lead to changes in energy markets. He's told people to literally drill, baby, drill. He's relaxed environmental requirements for drilling for oil. He's pulled out of the Paris Accord. Philip Saunders is director of the Investment Institute at 91. Philip, good evening to you. The oil and energy business is massive. It's complex. It's got many operators doing different things in different places. How important nowadays is a change in US policy in affecting these markets?
So I think that that it potentially is pretty significant because lower oil prices. We've got obviously a residual inflation problem, which has kept bond markets very nervous, and lower energy prices would, if that actually occurs as a result of Trump's actions, and obviously he's been talking to the Saudis about this, would obviously reduce costs. And that would have a direct impact on inflation.
Well, I mean, energy is a sort of one of the big multipliers in any economy. I mean, you would think that if he does all of what he said he's going to do, there would be more oil and thus cheaper oil. That's how it would seem. Obviously, I realize, especially if he is talking to the Saudis, it's not quite that simple.
No, clearly these things are not that simple. But certainly, the US can produce a lot more oil. Obviously, it's the top producer at the moment, and obviously a lot of the permits have been sort of, if you like, frustrated by regulation and the sort of drive for greener energy. He's obviously reversing that, and that means that the supply of oil and gas from the US is likely to increase, and quite a lot of that's going to be exported, which obviously competes with OPEC and makes it more difficult for OPEC to control prices.
Presumably this doesn't all happen overnight. Even now there'll still be a regulatory process. We're probably looking at 1-2 years, I would imagine?
Yes, but I think that, if you step back from all of this, you begin to see the picture that's emerging. Trump is pretty serious about addressing the deficit, both deficits actually, the current account deficit and the federal budget deficit, by reducing expenditure and by introducing tariffs in certain areas. And that plus policies that are likely to help to bring down inflation, or at least keep inflation lower than it would otherwise be, it's pretty bond market friendly. It's pretty interest rate friendly, and that is of very significant global interest.
It may so all of this may happen, and I completely accept what you say. It may not change the economics of how the energy world is changing. I'm no expert on this, but certainly, I made the point on this program the other day. 10 years ago, you would never have said that at least 30% of Texas, of the power supply in Texas, comes from solar now. Are we likely to see everything that Trump is doing, the changes in policy? Will it sort of slow down the process of moving towards electric cars and hybrids? On one level, yes, it would seem automatic that it would, but maybe not necessarily for long.
Yes, well, I think that it will definitely slow that process down. And you could argue that in the dash for sort of the energy transition, has possibly been excessive, trying to get it done on too short a timescale, which imposes very significant costs on consumers. And of course, basically that, along with other higher costs, clearly has resulted in supported the rise of populism internationally. So the trajectory, I think, potentially changes, or it gets reassessed. And China is doing its own thing at any rate, and the battle is going to be won or lost there rather than actually in the US or elsewhere.
I mean, they are the world's biggest, one of the world's biggest polluter, and of course the US is some way behind them, as I understand it. All of this then, the long-term value in oil markets, I mean, suddenly it would seem there's perhaps a bit more life left in oil than we previously thought. Not that it was anywhere near dead.
Yes, and I think that you could certainly conclude that. But clearly, if Trump gets his way, oil prices are going to be lower, and so you've got to take that into account too.
Philip Saunders, thank you so much. Really do appreciate it. Director of the Investment Institute at 91.
The Money Show
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
and DSTV channel 856.
Difficult to get away from President Donald Trump at the moment, of course. Well, one of the things that he's made is changes to the way that to the people who are running the cybersecurity cluster in the country. The Homeland Security has said the head of the Transportation Security Administration is also responsible for cybersecurity, is now changing. And one particular person, David Pekoska, who was actually appointed by Trump, is now leaving their position. Siphumelele Zondi is a tech expert. We speak to him every week. Siphumelele, good evening. Why is Pekoska such an important figure in cybersecurity in the US? And I imagine the US kind of sets the tone for cybersecurity around the world.
Oh, totally. You'll remember that leading up to these particular election, cybersecurity was a big deal. In fact, it was a big deal even when Trump was president the first time around. What you'll remember, Stephen, is that there was that talk, a lot of talk on how Trump came into power, details of Americans possibly having been infiltrated and shared with an outside entity and possibly another country that a lot of Americans are wary about. And then he then started to appoint people that he said were going to deal with cybersecurity issues. And what's actually important with about this particular individual is that there were a lot of laws that started to fight against fraud, ransomware, combating, and stolen identities even. So it's not clear why there are these changes, but then, as you say, that America sets the tone, because even leading up to these elections, there was a lot of talk. You'll know about the laws about apps that are created by those seen as adversaries of the United States of America, again, citing cybercrime issues that can be basically details being shared with other countries or government entities in other countries that Americans view with a lot of suspicion. So yes, cybersecurity is important in the United States of America. They're always worried about spies that are using all kinds of technology, and maybe the changes that Trump is coming up with is to have people who will be loyal to him in power and who haven't been part of the previous administration.
The head of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency also leaving. Are you expecting bigger cybersecurity changes? And cybersecurity is everything. I mean, cybersecurity makes your bank card work.
Totally. Cybersecurity basically meaning state security of the country. Because what you remember is that there's something that Americans are talking about, which they're calling salt typhoon. And they're saying that they believe that there is a lot of information about Americans, including geolocation, that could have been taken when phones of Americans were infiltrated. So there is that belief in America right now that Americans are being spied on, individuals, millions of Americans, and outside entities, outside security bodies, and Homeland Security or Departments of Home Affairs in the local context of other countries could be spying on Americans and what Americans are up to and using those details to their benefit. So that's basically the big worry with all these changes. That so it's not necessarily your details in terms of the banking as you mentioned, but it's basically how Americans behave, who Americans speak to, and what Americans do. That's the worry, and the fact that information could be with governments or state security agencies from other countries.
Do changes for the way the US runs this, I mean, does that have an impact on the rest of the world in some way?
Oh, totally. Because the reason they're behaving this way is because they're worried about other countries as well, and the fact that it's other countries that could be spying on Americans. So yes, and they also would lead the pack in terms of other countries also developing their own cybersecurity laws and upgrading things, including, for example, Jen Easterly that you just spoke about, who has said that they need to now look at artificial intelligence because it also poses a threat in some of these details being stolen and ending up with outside entity, as all kinds of governments and companies in other countries are also developing AI tools that could also be used by Americans. So yes, they would lead the way, and other countries would probably then also have to alter their cybersecurity laws to make their citizens safer when it comes to sharing details in the cyberspace.
I mean, one of the great sort of stories over the last little while has been around TikTok, a security concern, according to members of the Republicans and the Democrats. Now it looks like they might be under pressure. The Chinese government, ByteDance, might be under pressure to sell it to the president's friend, Elon Musk. It's a very strange thing. What's your outlook for TikTok at the moment?
Oh, and it is that. But the thing is, there are Americans who, again, are making all kinds of or are sharing all kinds of information online to say they seem to be unable to share stuff they could share previously, and they're feeling that there could have been alterations on what can be shared on TikTok without that big announcement, because there was also a worry on the fact that it's sort of like a free-for-all in terms of the information that you share on TikTok. And that was one of the worries, actually. And there are Americans who said there's the possibility that you can't share everything, basically based on what their experiences have been since the return of TikTok on Sunday in the United States of America. So that's the one we need to watch, on whether in America you can share everything that you could share previously on TikTok. And it does seem like Trump has given them a bit of, or has said that he'll give them a bit of a reprieve, and maybe they might not sell to an American if they can reach a negotiation of what America is actually looking for on TikTok, because he sort of has shared worry as well that a lot of people are using TikTok to make their money as an extra revenue generating stream, and if they then lose TikTok, they might lose that revenue generating stream. So they might come up with some sort of solution that perhaps might lead to TikTok not being sold to an American. But let's see on what he actually says, because he hasn't said what the way forward is after basically taking credit for TikTok returning to the US, and TikTok also acknowledging that a possibility of Trump coming in rather, was one of the reasons that they decided to do an about turn.
Siphumelele Zondi, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate it. Tech expert, of course, with us on The Money Show every Thursday, bringing the time to 7 o'clock.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, proud sponsor of the African Mining Indaba 2025. Good evening. Welcome to the second hour of the program. Still intrigued to hear your views around the Expropriation Act, now signed into law. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. I think in the end, the big question really is this actually going to change anything? Or is this just going to be one of those moments where every political party under the sun tries to remind their constituency why they exist, if you know what I mean? They're all going to shout and scream and say different things. And yet I don't know if on the ground and really in the law, it's actually going to change very much. I mean, obviously the law is new, it's different, it's changed. But I mean, I'm talking about actual properties being expropriated for nil or no compensation. Seems, for the moment at least, quite unlikely to me. Maybe I'll be wrong. Let's see. I'll be very interested in your view. We'll talk about the use of information, digital solutions, and dealing with climate change and environmental risks in just a moment. Interesting to put those two together, the use of big data, of course. Also, how you can make sure that you as a smaller business are able to make the most of 2025. And then don't forget, investment school for you to teach your children how to invest. One ice cream today or two ice creams tomorrow, I suppose, really would be the way that you would do it. It's all about pocket money, all about an allowance, all about managing money and being able to manage money. Absolutely vital. Very, very important. And I sometimes find that some children are very, very careful with their money. They won't spend any of it. They sort of hoard it. You know, it's like some kids when they're young, they get Easter eggs or whatever, will keep them almost for a year. And some will just eat them all. And some will just spend it all. And some will kind of spend a little bit and then put the rest away. I don't know if you've been, if you've a parent watching your children grow up, if you can see different personalities. I don't know if it always translates like that when they grow up, though. I think maybe they change, they become a bit more mature, a bit more careful, a bit more thoughtful. And at some point, of course, if you get money wrong, well, you will feel it, won't you?
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, with President Donald Trump back in the White House, I suspect the issue of climate change is about to become a little bit more political for a while. Despite that, the technical scientific solutions to climate change dealing with environmental risk are still improving, and I imagine they will continue to improve. The company Insight Terra says is actually helping companies manage environmental risk using a greenhouse gas and environmental risk platform. The founder and CEO at Insight Terra is Alistair Bovum. Alistair, good evening. You provide cloud-based software. How do you use that to manage environmental risk?
Good evening, Stephen, and good evening to listeners. So our platform is all around bringing all the data together and surfacing all that complex data for actionable insights for decision makers. So that's the key thing we do to turn data into action.
I presume it's a fair amount of data. I mean, and are you using just data from your customers or from one particular company to talk about one particular company, or are you getting data from other sources and putting it all together?
So we bring data from instrumentation in the ground, from Earth observation satellites, and from operational systems. So we bring all these different data sources into one platform so that decision makers can interact with it, augment it with AI decision making, and really drive the actions to mitigate climate change issues. So, for example, with increased floods and droughts, you need to manage water more effectively. With increased tension on greenhouse gas emissions, specifically like methane, you need to manage your leaks and your risks around your pipeline. So all these different industries require real-time data to manage their environmental risks.
So satellite images, I understand, you can sometimes get them almost in real time. There are plenty of providers. Ground-based sensors, where are you getting that information from? What kind of networks are you tapping into there?
So typically in a mining situation, for example, they're using new technology called long-range LoRa networks. So it's long-range radio type networks where wireless instrumentation is used to transmit the data to gateways and systems, and then that comes into the cloud, often using satellite communications or 3G networks, 5G networks.
Okay, so, I mean, what does that tell you about the ground?
Well, it tells you what's happening under the surface. So believe it or not, there's a lot of water underground. And one of the key risks, especially in the mining industry, is managing your underground water, specifically pollution. So you could have waste water into the water system and pollute it. But also water is a incredibly reactive to the ground, and increased rainfall can increase risk of slope failures. And you saw with the Augustfontein disaster just a couple of years ago, major rainstorms caused a failure of a large tailings facility, which polluted the environment and really impacted local communities.
Well, I mean, my first thought was that the ground sensors would be used for sort of seismic activity, but it all kind of leads to itself. But I was thinking of Jagersfontein as well. So what you should be able to do then is almost predict this is a problem, have a red flag here, someone needs to actually go and have a look at what's really going on and do some maintenance. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you're doing, and you're using big data to do it.
Exactly. So we bring all this data together and to assess what they call failure modes. So engineers assess where the critical risks may be. We then monitor that in real time and then also look forward, right? So we want to actually predict and forecast what rainfall might do to the situation and try and prevent the disasters from occurring in the first place. So it's all about bringing that together, and we collaborate with many civil engineers and consulting engineers who then utilize that data to adopt a proactive approach.
Is that data quite expensive? I mean, some of it, you might own yourself. Some of it you will have to buy from other people, and unless you have your own satellite, you're going to have to get it from somewhere. Some of that, is compiling that. I mean, I know there's a lot of software, but the actual data itself, I presume, is not free for you.
There are sources of satellite data. It's actually open source or free to obtain, especially from European space agencies. So there's actually a lot of initiatives where satellite data is actually freely available. However, it does cost money to compute and process that and turn it into something more intelligent. So that's actually typically where the cost goes. And we're working proactively with actually with a Japanese company who is launching a network of low Earth orbit radar satellites, and we are busy testing that to also monitor slopes and tailings dams from space. So it's very exciting that new technology is really building more and more data that we can use.
How much interest are you seeing from South African companies? I know you've just had, I think, quite a successful funding round, as I understand it. Are you seeing a lot of interest? I mean, obviously, mining is still a big industry for us, and I presume they'll be among your primary customers, your primary targets.
Well, in fact, it's actually been really exciting news for the industry is that the Global Tailings Management Institute is going to be launched and run out of South Africa. And this is really significant for the industry. Not only will it empower, create more jobs for the industry, but it's also a testament of the level of engineering skills that's available in South Africa, especially in the mining industry. So this institute, which has been set up by the UNEP and the principal, the ICMM, is to help create an independent body to assess and audit tailings dams worldwide. So there's a significant opportunity for South African engineers and technicians and data scientists and data engineers to be part of the program.
Obviously, we have a large number of tailings dams. I mean, I wouldn't even be able to come close to telling you how many there must be in South Africa. I don't know if you're able to watch all of them, but I presume you know where most of them are.
So in 2020, after one of the big disasters in Brazil, there was a considered effort to categorize the risk of all the different tailings dams around the world. So there has been databases put together. So they've been classified in high, critical, high, medium, low. And there's a considered effort by the mining industry to focus the efforts on the critical and high risk. And there's a new global standard in place, which by 2025, August this year, that all low to critical risk dams must be monitored and reported on.
There must be, it must be interesting. Once you get enough of a market share here, it's very difficult to compete with someone like yourself who is got all of the data, knows how to use it, and knows how to actually compute it to predict the right results. Where I'm heading with this is sort of artificial intelligence is a big, important tool for you.
Yes, AI and machine learning is very critical. And we do it in two ways. One at the edge, so on site. So we use machine learning to clean and transform data and also secure it. Security is a big concern for many companies. So we've got some novel security. And in the cloud, AI is really around then turning that into decision support systems. For example, automating automating quantitative analysis and statistical machine learning. So that's where we try and make the process more effective and efficient for the engineers.
Thank you very much indeed. Alistair Bovum is the founder and CEO at Insight Terra. Fascinating to see what information is being used for. 17 after 7.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
Well, at the start of a year, one of the things you want to do as a small business is to make sure that actually every opportunity that comes along, you're able to maximize, you're able to make the most out of it. Joining us to talk about that is Nicole Swart, the Managing Director at Merchant Capital. Nicole, good evening. I mean, some of this seems like almost obvious. Some of it actually, it really does need, you do sort of think you need to be reminded. And one of the first points about this is putting your customers first.
Absolutely agreed. And hi, Stephen. Good to chat. I think that I was just listening to your previous discussion, and I think, it's interesting that you were talking about AI and, the next thing that entrepreneurs need to start worrying about and thinking about. But when you think about putting your customers first and you're a business owner, business owners in South Africa need to acknowledge that they've always been doing that. It's not something new. It's not revolutionary. They've always been doing this. I would just encourage, based on what we're going through as an entrepreneurial business, Merchant Capital is an entrepreneurial business servicing entrepreneurs, what we've been going through and also what we're watching within our client base. So there's a couple of trends that I think, SMEs need to be on top of. So what we've been phenomenal at in South Africa is providing personal service. Like we all know, unless you're putting your customers first, you're not going to survive. In South Africa, it's like a no-brainer, nothing new. But what is changing is that to remain competitive in terms of customer experience, you need to think about digitization. So I wouldn't worry about what AI is saying in terms of, oh my gosh, it sounds like a lot of data and it sounds like I need to go and get a degree. When you're talking about digitization in the retail space, it's around looking at those customers of ours where you've got a retail client where their customers are online. So generally, 77% of us in South Africa are very happy purchasing online. So if you're a retail client and you run a business, it's a retail business, think about if your clients are online and they're happy to deal with you online and then move in that direction. So, for example, what we've done is we figured out that our clients love our private banking experience. So that's never going to go away. We're personable, and that's going to remain as is. But we've added digital to support our clients and to reduce friction in dealing with us. So that's what we have done. Mm-hmm. If you think about, let's say, a hairdresser, one of our clients is a hairdresser. What they've done is instead of dealing on WhatsApp with their clients, you can get it online. You've implemented a very simple booking system, which helps their customers. So digitization doesn't need to mean, an online application, which can be very expensive. So I would really start planning towards that. And think about loyalty programs and rewards programs. South Africans love that stuff. Think about training your online staff so that, and training your frontline staff around, yes, you need to be providing quick, accurate, professional service, but you need to be also ready for the conversation around upsell to receptive customers. So I would say that customer service, customer excellence, nothing new. There's just really some awesome things that we can add now based on what's happening in South Africa and globally.
One of the difficult things for anything, but particularly for small businesses, to know when to make a change or to pivot, to do something differently, because you may have a bad month, you may have a second bad month, you may think, well, actually, this is going to turn, then it doesn't. How do you know when the right moment has come that actually now it's time to pivot?
I think that, first of all, look at what's happening, in your finances. So I think that every business is very much on top of that and will know exactly, week to week what's happening. I would also strongly recommend looking at what your competitors are doing. So what we do at Merchant Capital is understand what other alt lenders are doing, but also people that are not totally in our industry. So we've got an eye on what the banking industry is doing, because we want to make sure that our offering is over and above what anybody else is in the market doing, whether they're offering exactly what we're doing or even adjacent to what we're doing. So let's take a butchery, for example. So let's say that they are not at the sales that they were used to year on year, for example. Then what we've seen clients in those environments do is potentially look at what they're selling, where they're even positioned. Their location makes a big difference. They look at their full supply chain. Where can they cut costs? Do they have an owner and a manager on site? Because it's so amazing that sometimes there is such a direct correlation between whether you've got a business owner or a senior manager on site versus staff. And, business owners over a period of time sometimes like to extract themselves from the business and move off site and open up another one and sort of get a bit sidetracked. But those that are close to their business and know what's happening day to day are the ones that are going to pivot. They're the ones that know what's happening in the market, that know what's happening around them. They know what their customers are saying every day because they actually see them, during the week and can have conversations. Those are the ones that are going to pivot.
It's all about that feedback, isn't it? Obviously, you also need to manage your money. And this can be quite difficult. You would like to think that actually, after a while, you get quite good at it. But it is something you need to master.
Completely. And one thing that owners and our clients have learned over the last 5 years, I think, is better money management. It's been tight. It's been tough. So through COVID and even coming out of COVID, we were expecting, sort of like this massive improvement quickly. It didn't happen. I think that, so that the upside of that is that our customers, we've seen, are a lot better at being on top of their costs. So even in the good times. So we're experiencing now, customers starting to use our funding, for example. We've got a customer in the poultry business that has just doubled their revenue over the last year using our funding. But they are still 100% on top of us now, in the good times, as they were during COVID. So they've never, so that lesson has not left them. And that's an amazing lesson. It's a hard one for a business owner, but it's a great lesson. The other thing that we've noticed is that our customers are keeping a reserve for when they need it. And that, during the good times is seen as maybe not quite necessary. So they'll use us for financing for growth, and that's why we're here. We support our clients during growth. That's what Merchant Capital is about. But they also use us for, I need a stock, and I'm going to get a discount now. I want to buy a big stock, and I'm going to sell it over the next 3 months. That they can use us for that. But they've also learned to not just, draw down on capital when they need it and sell the stock and, live on the edge. It's actually keeping a reserve for when there is that bad month that you talked about. Another one is to reduce debtors and, to keep your, as I say, owner involvement, senior management involvement, keep your debtors down. So it's the last mile. You've sold the product, you've marketed, you've sold, you've serviced, you've done everything. And if you're in a B2B situation and you don't have money coming in at the till and, banked immediately, then, keep those debtors down, be on top of it, make sure that you're, and I think they've learned. I think that they have learned.
And very quickly, there is some relief on the horizon. You'd like to think that might help out. And I'm talking about inflation in particular and maybe some economic growth as well.
Stephen, if you read all the literature, it's saying, lower inflation, interest rate cuts, early access to retirement savings. They're talking about real salary increases, which all means that, consumer spending goes up. That's 60% of our country's GDP. And with that, business owners are going to feel the relief. It's not going to be maybe by the end of January, but, it's going to be coming this year. So I think that the opportunity, I think it's a completely different year to 2024. We've got no load shedding for 300 days in a row. And investors are becoming warmer to business investment. So I would say that it's time for clients, if I was planning at the beginning of 2025, is to plan for how can I make this my business and my client experience ready for when my customers come, because they will come. think about your refurbs. Think about when the clients come through the door, what are they seeing? How are they experiencing you? Don't wait for the customers to come to have a bad experience, to be a bit, surprised by the tactness of whatever you've got to offer, and then for them not to come back. Rather get ready.
Thank you very much indeed, Nicole Swart. Really appreciate the time. Managing Director of Merchant Capital. Just some interesting points as we sort of start the business year, get going, get everything going. Talking of getting going, we're going to focus on getting your children going with investing. That's Investment School this evening. How to turn your children into good investors. How to make sure that as they get older, they have plenty of ice cream. Just gone 7:30.
The Money Show.
Investment School.
Well, in investment school, normally we try and teach you to do something or to teach you to understand something. Frankly, it's usually about teaching me. But today, we're going to teach you how to teach your children how to be good investors. And of course, you do need to start quite young. Lunga Mahlaba is the Business Development Manager at the Inkunzi Wealth Group, and Carly Esterhuizen is the VP of Global Brand at EasyEquities, both joining us on Investment School this evening. And of course, you know the value of teaching your children about money and hopefully setting them into good habits. All right, Carly, let me start with you. If you're going to start teaching your children about how to manage money, first, they need some money, and you will have to give it to them. In other words, you will have to give them pocket money or an allowance, or whatever you want to call it, if you want them to have any hope of managing money.
Stephen, thanks so much for having me. No one told me I was going to have to give them money. What? That wasn't in the brochure.
Yes. There was a brochure when you got children. It'd be quite a long queue.
I know. I must have missed that. Yeah, totally. No, I mean, look, I've grown up as a kid and a teenager having an allowance, and it was really valuable for me in terms of teaching me about how to manage money, work towards a goal, have sort of this delayed gratification, and really understand the value of stuff. So it's definitely something I want to do with my kids. And there's so many different ways you can do it. I'm interested to hear where this discussion goes. I've got some thoughts about what I want to do, but yeah, definitely pocket money. We'll start with small amounts and take it from there. And go on the journey together.
Lunga Mahlaba, I mean, this is something that you kind of need to start relatively young. You need to really teach your children how this works, what money is. I find it fascinating. One of the questions I often ask people when we talk about, people's journeys with money is, when did they first realize what money is? And some people learn about it at a very young age and some a little bit later. And often there's a tuck shop involved.
Absolutely, Stephen. Good evening to you and to the listeners. Well, basically, it's about creating the culture and an environment that promotes good financial behaviors, right? So you train your kids at an early age to actually start applying things like budgeting, which teaches them about income and expenses, and also gives them the capacity to actually allocate funds in an equitable manner, right? So promoting savings and setting out goals. So basically, the idea is to ensure that you start as early as possible. They always say the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago or today. So it's about starting and actually creating those systems to allow for better financial outcomes for your kids.
Carly, part of this, when you say to a child, okay, this is how much you've got, and let's just for argument's sake say you've got 20 Rand, right? And you're going to say to a child, you need to put some away and you're allowed to spend some and you need to sort of invest others. That can be quite a difficult conversation. I mean, what kind of system would you recommend?
So I think it also depends on the age of your child and when you start doing this. But like Lunga said, let's get this going as soon as we can. So I think you've got to explain that to them in a way that makes sense to them. I don't know if you've ever heard or seen the marshmallow test. It's where you essentially give a really young child, say maybe 2 years old, one marshmallow and tell them that if they don't eat the marshmallow when you leave the room and after a long period of time, you'll give them 2 marshmallows. And, it's quite funny to see the different kids and, how they handle that situation. But something as simple like that is a way that you can illustrate in a very tangible way for a young child the power of, patience and even sort of compounding returns, about, being able to get more if you just, give it some time. So I think if you can start with easy to understand principles like that, it's good. I also think there's something to be said about giving your child, autonomy with that pocket money. That was always the case with me. So when I was given pocket money, I was never told you have to save this much, you have to invest this much, and you've got to only spend it on these kinds of things. I think it's quite nice to let your child figure that stuff out on their own if you can help them understand the value of those behaviors. And I think there's lots of ways you can do that and lots of ways to support that. For example, you could say to your child, if you save money, if you end up at the end of the year with a little bit of in your savings account and you haven't spent it, I'll double it and you'll have an awesome December holiday because you'll have double the savings. You can find ways to incentivize them or help them grow that money by giving them extra tasks to earn a bit more here and there. So, yeah, I think it's a journey and you've got to use the language that makes sense to them at the stage where they're at.
I suppose also, Lunga, you're trying to empower a child. It can, for some children, almost be an act of cruelty to say, this is your money, but I'm looking after it, or this is money that is yours, but you can't have now. And children can react to that in very different ways. Some might actually be quite upset if you even try and bring up the subject. They see it in a way that you're giving them something and now taking it away again. So it can be quite a difficult concept to get across.
Absolutely. I like what Khalid's saying. Basically, it's about ensuring the method in which you apply when you are teaching the child is applicable, particularly to the child's age and also to the circumstances. Your child, their behavior. And once you do know that, you are then able to structure systems which can then yield better outcomes for them, right? So it's quite key to have that understanding about your child and then also make this process fun, because you don't want to then be too strict because they might then rebel. So make it fun using simple concepts. When I was young, we read this book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and there was also Monopoly. So you teach children those tricks, how to play Monopoly, and then the concept of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, by talking about it and then also then sharing those concepts in a simplified manner with them. It does then help improve their outcomes.
I have to tell you, Lunga, I played a lot of Monopoly with my kids over the holidays, and it's fascinating to look at the different strategies. So my son will just buy everything, and whether you own one of the streets or not, he will just buy it all. My daughter will be very specific and go for only the expensive properties. She'll even spend a lot of money to buy them from someone else because she knows if she just gets 2 or 3 of those and does all the hotels and everything, actually she's going to win in the longer run. And I wonder, Lunga, if that tells you what they're going to be like a little bit later. I realize people change as they grow up, but it does show you there's a strategy at work at quite a young age.
Absolutely. So basically, it's all about what I had said earlier. It's creating that environment, right, which then allows them to also be their own people, but actually creating those parameters or infrastructure which then promotes that they actually start saving at an early age, right? More than even budgeting, as I mentioned earlier. We all know about financial literacy in South Africa. It's very bad. High indebtedness, people not having sufficient for retirement. So communicating that to the kid in a manner that the kid will understand will then actually promote the concepts of educating and financial literacy.
Carla, how important is it to encourage your kids to save for something specific? And I have my own memory a long, long time ago. I was about 8 years old and there was this sort of set of cars that I really wanted. Then I had to save a little bit. It wasn't a long time. I was very lucky, quite privileged, and eventually able to buy it. And that kind of feeling of having this was quite exciting. How important is it to sort of, say, if you do this well, you can have this in a certain amount of time. And maybe for young kids, it needs to be a relatively short space of time, a few weeks. But that must be very powerful.
So for you, it was the cars. For me, it was Ultra Hair Barbie. Ultra Hair Barbie was the business when I was a kid, and all I wanted was this Barbie. But back then it was quite expensive. So it was around 70 Rand, which sounds super cheap right now. I'm sure Barbies are 700 Rand now. But, I was getting, I think at that time, like 5 Rand a month or something silly. It was And I really wanted this ultra hair Barbie, and I diligently saved for months and months and months to get this ultra hair Barbie, and I bought it. And there were two things that happened there. The first was I learned how rewarding it can be and how good you feel about yourself when you can work towards that goal. It was a really rewarding experience for me. The other thing I learned was discipline. I was also at those tuck shops. I also wanted the Caramella Bear and the Coke and all of that. And I had to make some sacrifices because I really wanted the Ultra Hair Barbie. And so those are really important lessons to learn. And the earlier you learn them, I think it only puts you in a better position as you're growing up and as you get older. So I think it's important. And I think it also makes it real. It's quite hard, Lunga, you're explaining about retirement and that kind of thing. It's really hard to talk about those concepts to kids now. To be honest with you, I don't think I even had my head around that stuff until I was like in my late 20s. So, you've got to sort of like make it a real experience for them, something that they can also experience emotion and joy and feel really proud of themselves. I think that just promotes that behavior.
Lunga, it's fascinating. You can see wealth staying in some families, right? And there are lots of reasons for why that happens. One of them, though, is that it seems that good habits are being passed down. So children are receiving a good education because those parents were able to save and maybe were quite disciplined on making sure that they were educated. They would have maybe had an education policy or something like that at quite a young age. And then their children go and do the same. And then so those parents' grandchildren end up having the same kind of thing. And you see that everywhere. I'm not making so much of a comment about South African society, although it is a comment about South African society, as it is a comment about societies generally. You see that time and time again. What I'm trying to get to is if you save for your children's education now, your grandchildren will probably have quite good financial habits.
Definitely. So everything starts early. So if you prepare and create your roadmap strategically, you do enhancely improve the outcomes of your kids. So looking at education policies, you could even consider actually investing for your kids, right, in passive and aggressive sort of portfolios, which then would promote that in the future they are off compared maybe to the generations or people that don't do that. So it's quite key to actually have those financial plans, and kids learn by practice. So if you as a parent are showing those examples, it becomes a bit more easier for them to learn. So I think it's also quite key, there's always different strokes for different folks, depending on the age of the child, the level of understanding of the child. You definitely can apply smart planning sort of models, which definitely could enhance the future of the family in general, right? So things like educational plans, even if it's not maybe a policy, but actually having maybe a life policy that has an educational plan embedded to it is another form actually protecting the future of the education for the kid, including not only maybe buying policies, but actually invest. We know that you get better results if you invest for a longer period of time in some sort of assets. So by doing that, you actually show the kids by example and also ensure their future outcomes improved.
We're speaking to Lunga Mahlaba, the Business Development Manager at the Inkunzi Wealth Group, and Carly Esterhuizen, the VP of Global Brand at EasyEquities, and talking about teaching your children how to be investors on the Investment School this evening.
The Money Show.
Investment School.
Carly Esterhuizen is VP of Global Brand at EasyEquities. Lunga Mahlaba is the Business Development Manager at the Inkunzi Wealth Group, talking about how to teach your children to manage their money as they grow up. Such an interesting thing to talk about. Carly, there's a lot of fuss around some investment apps at the moment. And one of the great things is that you can sort of access your money. You can see what it's doing. I don't know how useful that is with children. Maybe useful to help you to invest for your children, but it's not something that children necessarily are going to understand. You give a child a cell phone, I can tell you what's going to happen, and it's not that.
I would argue with you and say you would be very surprised at how many kids are actively managing their own portfolios, proud of it, putting all their birthday and bar mitzvah and Christmas and tooth fairy money into their EasyEquities accounts, and portfolios outperforming mine. It's really, really quite incredible. And I've met those kids, and it's, I'm not just kind of making it up. These are real stories of people that I've spoken to. So it's, I think with certainly EasyEquities, the platform itself is obviously very intuitive and easy to use. And so that's a big factor. But also I think it's about being part of that conversation with your kids. Certainly I've set up a tax-free savings account for my daughter, and obviously she's not contributing to it right now. But as soon as she can, I would love to be able to involve her and say, what ETFs should we look at today, and explain what those ETFs are about and get her really interested and excited about it. I know people whose kids are like this. For example, our risk officer, Nicola Comninos, she incentivizes her kids that if they put some of their pocket money into their EasyEquities account, she'll double it. And it's also almost become like a competition with her kids as to who can get the most money in their EasyEquities account. And they sit together as a family and talk about their investments. And that's really incredible, because I certainly wish I had been doing that when I was 8, 9, 10, or 12. I might be on my yacht right now if that was the case.
How do you turn kids into that? I mean, are there certain things? I mean, is it just about watching the value increase? You turn it not into a game, but you just make it cool for them. That's quite hard to do.
You know what I think is quite helpful for a lot of people, not just kids. It's about, again, making it something that's quite tangible. So, for example, one of my first investments was Walt Disney, just because I'm a Disney freak. Like, I've watched all the Disney movies and I love them. Taking brands that might be relevant to a child and explaining to them that, not only can you watch Mickey Mouse or Frozen on TV, you can actually go and be part of that story and be part of the success of that story, and maybe framing it in that way, at least initially, just to help them understand that. So it's about using a different narrative. It doesn't have to be all complicated and charts and, PE ratios. It can be about, watching your money grow. Like I said, that marshmallow test is one of the fun ways you can kind of explain the concept of that, but also just talking about, hey, we're in McDonald's right now. Do you know that you can actually go into your EasyEquities account right now and own a share of this restaurant that we're in? Making it a bit more real for them, I think, is what helps.
Lunga, as an adult, doesn't matter how old you are, don't you get that same rush when you look at your banking app and you see how your investments are doing, if they're doing well, and particularly if you're using it to pay for your child's education? That rush is still there.
Absolutely. It becomes very exciting, as Kali is saying, when you're chatting to your kids and say, this is a Woolies, you own a piece of the store, right? Maybe we can get in that particular manner, but it's quite key that we do actually talk about these concepts without making them too stringent or too focused, making them fun, so that we are able to then talk about these topics to our kids, particularly relating to if you delay your gratification today, the results will become better in the future. That's a simpler concept which anyone can understand, even for kids. If you do actually talk to them, depending on their ages, that let's not spend today, because the value in the future could then be more. And also then promote, actually, because we're currently living in a digital age, actually promote teaching or watching with the kids shows that actually educate, and also invest in these apps that actually guide them to actually improve their financial outcomes. So it does in the future yield better outcomes, and it does actually then help them practice daily investing, right, in a simplified sort of manner. So the digital age does make things more streamlined, because the adaptation of it is very easy. It's easy to use, user-friendly and stuff of that nature. And there are a lot of people online who are teaching about finances. So you could just make it a habit whilst creating that environment I was talking about, which then helps children actually improve their outcome yourself, because the more you actually do it, the kids also then learn.
Also, Lunga, I mean, you do need to talk about keeping a diverse portfolio, and I think that might be quite a difficult concept. But I suppose the way you would do it is you would say, you can invest in your toys or you can invest in your long hair Barbie, but you actually need to invest in both.
Absolutely. It's that simple concept of you can't put all your eggs in one basket, right? Because if you do that, then it's dire. So just talking about those concepts of allocating resources differently in a manner that the kid could then understand. It's something that can then be applied, but it all then boils down to the age of the child, but introducing it gradually does actually yield those positive outcomes.
Carly, obviously we want to set people up for good habits. People do grow up, though. I mean, we stop eating quite as much ice cream. Unfortunately, we sometimes spend it on something else.
Do we?
But don't we? I mean, this is really all about that, isn't it? It is about making sure that people that kids understand it and understand the consequences of doing it well and the consequences of doing it badly.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this before we got on today and we're chatting. And I was thinking, life also happens. We're not perfect as parents. I'm not perfect. My budget isn't to the cent perfect every month. And that's also something to learn and accept, that it ebbs and flows. And sometimes you flush and sometimes you overspend a bit. And you learn lessons in those mistakes as well. So yes, it is about habits, but it's also about saying you don't have to be super strict with those parameters. Let your child discover what they are for themselves, because every single person's relation and style of managing their money is so different. The things that are really important to you, where you want to put your money, are different to the things that are important to me. So it's a journey of self-discovery, actually. And yes, you want those habits to form, but I think that if you
I think we're beginning to lose.
And you support with a lot of, education and
sure.
Have you got me?
Yeah, I'm afraid we are going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. That line beginning to leave us there. Carly Esterhuizen is the VP of Global Brand at EasyEquities, and Lunga Mahlaba is the Business Development Manager at Inkunzi Wealth Group, teaching your children how to invest on Investment School tonight.
You're listening to The Money Show with Stephen Grootes.
That's all for today. The Money Show back with you tomorrow. Good evening, 8 o'clock.